Bonjour French 101 students, bienvenue au vidéo 5 du chapitre 1. So we are in video 5 of the first chapter, and as you'll see for the first few slides that we're going to take a look at here, we're going to review what you learned last time in video 4. So remember, you learned about some adjectives. You also learned a little bit about making comparisons with those adjectives. So we'll do a quick review of those concepts. I think they're very helpful to review just because adjectives have so many more forms than English adjectives do. We don't have to make our adjectives agree in number or in gender. And so it can be hard to remember that sometimes, that depending on who you're talking about, you have to add different endings to adjectives. And I think this chart we see here in the middle of this slide kind of gives us a good overview of that. So if you look at the different adjectives that we've got as examples here under the masculine singular column, these would be like kind of the generic base forms of those adjectives. You learned about them last time. So some of those examples would be like paresseux, which means lazy, canadien, which of course means Canadian, sportif would be like sporty or athletic, and intellectuel, intellectual. And so these would be the forms that we would use to describe anything that's masculine and in its singular form. So I could simply say something like, let me just insert a text box in here so we can add some examples here and there. So I could easily say, il est paresseux. Okay, so I'm just describing he in general. Okay, I can replace that with something plural. I can say Adam et Pierre. Or I can just say Adam. Let's keep it singular for now. Adam est paresseux. So he's lazy. Adam is lazy. I can then put it into different forms. So I could say, let's say Adam, we'll go with Pierre this time. But now I need to change my verb because I have more than one person and the verb changes to match more than one person. So now we're moving on to masculine plural. So Adam et Pierre sont paresseux. And with this particular adjective, it's not going to change in form, whether it's plural or singular. But different adjectives take on different forms depending on their spelling. So in some cases, you kind of have to memorize it. Okay, now, if I wanted to talk about a female, I can say elle, she. I need to change my verb to match that, elle est. But now I must change the form of my adjective because I'm talking about a female person. So, elle est paresseuse. And there the spelling is going to change, the pronunciation is going to change. Okay, if I want to say they, I can add an S to that. This is an all-female group. Elles sont paresseuses. So I have to change the form of the adjective and I have to add an S to the end to show that this is a female plural group. Now what happens if I change this to il? They in the masculine form. It could be a group of all guys or it could be a mixed group of guys and girls. Ils sont, now it's going to change to the masculine plural form. Ils sont paresseux. So they are lazy. Okay, so depending on who this subject of the sentence is, this is what controls everything in the sentence. Whoever that subject happens to be, masculine, feminine, a mixed group, singular, plural, you've got to look there to decide what kind of adjective form you're going to use after the verb être. And you can see it in these example sentences. So, il, masculine singular, est canadien. So, canadien is the masculine singular form. It's just referring to one person, he. He is lazy. Ils sont canadiens. Okay, canadien is pronounced in the same way, but because we're talking about il, which is a masculine or mixed masculine feminine group, I now need to add S to the end, but the S is silent. I can talk about one female. Elle est canadienne. And notice, of course, the pronunciation is going to change. And if I have a plural female group, I will also say elles sont canadiennes. The spelling doesn't change. Well, it changes by adding an S, but it sounds exactly the same. And I have to change my form of être to match the subject too. And of course, we can see a sentence that looks a little bit like what we saw in video 4, making a comparison. And that comparison form is plus que. Je suis plus paresseuse que ma meilleure amie. I am literally more lazy than my best friend. In English, we would say lazier because being a two-syllable word, we would just add er to the end. That doesn't happen in French, but so in this case, we're using plus que, depending on the word that follows plus. Okay, so hopefully that gives you a good reminder of the different forms of adjectives and why we need to change them according to who the subject is. Okay, and you remember that there are some other adjectives that kind of have some maybe somewhat irregular forms. So we might have a masculine singular adjective like beau, which means like handsome or beautiful, depending on what it's describing. The plural form, notice we add an X to the end. So whenever you have an EAU ending on an adjective, to make it plural in the masculine form, you just add an X to the end. The feminine forms would be belle and belle. Same pronunciation, but we add S to make it plural. Jumeau, which is twin, you would add an S to the end to make it masculine plural. Jumelle is the feminine form of jumeau, and you add an S to it to make it plural. So if you wanted to talk about twin sisters, les sœurs jumelles, then you would use this form right over here because they are girls and you're describing them by saying that they're twin sisters. Nouveau is just like beau and jumeau. You're just adding an X to the end to make it plural. And then we have the feminine forms nouvelle and nouvelle. And finally, we have vieux, which means old. And the feminine form of that would be vieille. And it's pronounced the same way in the plural. So I could come up with an example sentence to kind of use these adjectives and put them into action. Oh, I can say, il est beau. Oh, he's handsome, he's good looking. I can change that to il in the plural. And what do I have to do here? I have to change this to sont, and then I need to add X to the end. So again, whatever that subject is, that's what's controlling everything else in the sentence. So what comes after that has to agree. The form of être has to agree with the subject, and the form of the adjective also has to agree with the subject. And that would be a big difference between English and French. So let's say, ils sont beaux, they are handsome. The English sentence is that. So in the English situation, they and il are the same. Sont and are kind of, they work in the same way. Are, the form of the verb be, has to change with our subject too. But the adjective doesn't have to change form. I don't have to add an S to the end of handsome to make it agree with they. So that's a big difference between English and French. Okay, so ils sont beaux. I can change my subject to elle in the singular. And what do I need to do to être? Change it to est. And I need to make a big change here. Elle est belle. She is beautiful. And what if it is a plural group of girls or women? I would say elles sont belles. I'm going to add an S to the end of my adjective. So it would be the same kind of process for the other adjectives that you see here. All right. And remember last time we also talked about the comparative forms, plus que, aussi que, moins que. So I could say, je suis plus grande que Lisa. So I'm pronouncing the D. I'm using the feminine form because I'm describing myself, je. Je suis aussi mince que Lisa. Oh, I'm just as thin as Lisa. Or je suis moins sportive que Lisa. I'm using the form sportive because I'm referring to myself. Some other forms that are good to know about in addition to plus que. So for example, instead of using plus que with the adjective bon, you would say meilleur que. So that means like you are better than Lisa at something. And instead of, let's say, with the adjective, or you'll see this example here, it says you'll see both plus mauvais or mauvaise or pire que to say worse than. So Léa est meilleure en français que Lisa. So you wouldn't say, for example, Léa est plus bonne. It doesn't work like that. We just use the word better. And we do the same thing in English. We have an irregular word which is better. You don't say more good. So Léa est meilleure en français que Lisa. She's better in French than Lisa. Or je suis meilleure en anglais que Lisa. I'm better in English than Lisa. Or je suis pire en anglais que Lisa. In English, I wouldn't say I'm more bad in English than Lisa. I would say I'm worse. So French also has these special words to say more good or more bad. We just wouldn't say that in either language. All right. So now that we've done that review of the comparative and these different forms of adjectives, the other topic we need to cover in video 5 is questions. Okay, so of course, if you're going to have a conversation in any language, you need to know how to ask questions, right? And you can do that in a few different ways. And in English, we ask questions in different ways too. We can definitely make some direct comparisons between our languages here. So let's say a question like this one. Elle est mariée. So this is she is married. That can be a statement too, right? It doesn't have to be a question. What makes it a question? The only thing is intonation. So if your voice goes up at the end of that string of words, it's going to be understood as a question, right? Elle est mariée? Okay? Or elle est mariée. If you don't do the intonation, it sounds like something you're sure of. But if you add the intonation, you're not sure and you need to find that out. Okay, and the same thing here. Tu es d'ici? Okay, so are you from here? You could easily say tu es d'ici without intonation, and it sounds like you already know that. Okay, so intonation is definitely one way that you can ask a question in French. We do the same thing in English. So if I were to say she's married, I sound like I'm really sure about that. But if I say she's married, I'm trying to find that information out. Okay, another way that you can ask a question, so we're going to learn 2 ways in this presentation. There is a third way of asking questions, but that's kind of going to come a little bit later in the semester. I think it's good to stick with just these 2 ways for now. So you can ask a yes-no question if you take this expression, est-ce que, and that's how you pronounce it, est-ce que. It looks like there's a lot of extra letters there and you wouldn't need all of them. But there are plenty of silent letters in French, just like we have in English. So you can tack est-ce que or est-ce que with the apostrophe if it comes before a vowel sound. You can stick those onto any statement and basically turn it into a question. So I could say the sentence, tes amis sont étudiants, and that means your friends are students, and that's a statement. If I want to turn it into a question, all I have to do is say, est-ce que tes amis sont étudiants? Are your friends students? It automatically turns it into a question, intonation or not. Okay, I could say ils sont intellectuels. Okay, they are intellectual, and that is a statement. I might be stating that as something I believe to be true. As soon as I put est-ce que on the front and I drop the e in que because il begins with a vowel sound, I'm now turning this into a question. Like, est-ce qu'ils sont intellectuels? Oh, are they intellectual? And the same for the remaining 2 questions. Okay, Léa est mariée. Well, this one, I guess, really, it would sound like a question with or without est-ce que because it's giving 2 possibilities. Like, Léa est mariée ou célibataire? I guess it could be a statement too if you were thinking, okay, one of these has to be true. Léa est mariée ou célibataire? C'est comme ça. It's like that. But as soon as I put est-ce que on it, it becomes a question. Est-ce que Léa est mariée ou célibataire? And elle est étudiante. Elle est étudiante. She's a student. Okay, as soon as I add est-ce que, it becomes a question. Est-ce qu'elle est étudiante? So is she a student? Okay, so definitely some easy ways, I think, to turn a statement into a question. All right, and finally, another way that we can kind of turn a statement into a question is using what we call tag questions in English. And a tag question in English would be something as simple as right, like she's married, right? And it's just basically asking for confirmation. We do this all the time in English. In French, you do the same thing by adding n'est-ce pas or non. Oh, it's kind of like saying right, or like the non is kind of like, isn't that the case? So you could take a statement like il est marié and turn it into a yes-no question. Oh, il est marié, n'est-ce pas? Or il est marié, non? So that's another easy way to create a yes-no question. And then you could, when you answer that question, since these are yes-no questions with est-ce que, you're going to answer it beginning with either oui or non. So, est-ce que tu es marié? Are you married? And you can answer either oui, je suis marié, or non, je ne suis pas marié. Okay, so now I'm going to ask you a question that you can answer in the interaction that comes up. So, est-ce que tu es étudiant or étudiante? And you can give me the answer to that question. You can say either oui, je suis étudiant, or oui, je suis étudiante, or non, je ne suis pas étudiant, or non, je ne suis pas étudiante. And make sure you choose the right form of étudiant that goes along with you if you're referring to yourself as masculine or feminine. Okay, so that is the question I would like you to answer. All right, so that is everything for video 5. So you had a quick review of adjective forms. You also learned about 2 ways to ask questions in French. And now you should be ready to even start having some conversations and finding some things out about people. Okay, so that's it for this time, and I will see you again in video 6. À la prochaine!